Okay, so thank you for joining me. Happy Friday, everyone. Today is June 7th, and this is Frequently Asked Questions for Beginning Beekeepers, episode 20 already. So thank you for joining me. If you're new, this is for basic beekeeping solutions in your own backyard, small apiary, just keeping bees for the fun of it, and I hope we can answer your questions here. If you're returning, welcome, and thank you for being a frequent viewer and listener for those of you who are commuting home on Friday. And if you have questions, the way it works, you just write them down in the comment section below the video. If you want to know what we're going to cover in this video segment, please look down in the video description and we'll line item each thing that's covered so you're not wasting your time if you're looking for something specific and it's not in this video. The final sequence of this video will be outside in the bee yard. Thank goodness, the weather's good. And what we're going to do there is update you on the Saskatraz bees. We did an install of the Saskatraz bees 29 days ago, so a lot of people are wondering how they're working out. And did the queens make it? Are they laying? And so on. We're going to answer that, so that's going to be great. What is this weird piece of gear right here next to me? One of the frequent questions I get, and it does fall under FAQs for beekeeping. Hey Fred, what camera did you use to get those pictures? What camera did you shoot that sequence with? Wow, that's really good stuff. Well, I'm going to show you, I do a lot of macro and micro video and still work. So this is a very uncomplicated, very simple rig here that I'm sure everyone already has, or you can just use your cell phone. Very good. This is one of the Nikon's new mirrorless cameras. This is the Nikon Z7. It has high resolution. So what is this weird setup? What's on top here is the SU800, which has been around forever, and it's how I used to trigger off-camera flashes. But it partners with these tiny flashes that are mounted on a macro ring. So these are flashes, and I can set my exposure and use it anywhere, run and gun with it. So that's for still pictures, but I can also shoot video with it. So sometimes when you're seeing a really close-up video sequence, you are seeing stuff from this camera. It might also be from a dedicated video camera. It might be from a big body Nikon D5. If you don't know already, I make my living as a professional photographer and videographer, and you may have even actually seen some of my nature sequences without knowing that I took them, because I sell stock video sequences about nature. And some of that will be, in fact, upcoming in Animal Planet's Nature's Extreme Secrets Explained, I think it's called. So anyway, this is the Nikon Micro Nikkor 105mm f2.8. If you're not a shutterbug, it's not going to really matter to you. You can really get good pictures with your cell phone. I'm not even kidding. You do not have to dump this kind of money. I also have the Nikon Z6 mirrorless camera for low light video sequences. So if I'm out there, recently I did a thing about bullfrogs. If it's low light and I need silky smooth stuff, I use that. These little flashes on here are the SR200s for those of you who need to know every detail. And this actually comes as a macro rig for all Nikon stuff. You can probably get it for Canon as well. I don't want to get into any discussions about Nikon versus Canon or any of those discussions, which is exactly why I don't do videos about photographic equipment generally, unless somebody gives something to me and I have to promote it. So let's move right into bees now that that question has been answered. And first question, the Saskatraz update. Everybody wants to know, how are the Saskatraz bees doing? They're doing great. Go all the way to the end. In fact, the top comment in the comment section will be the time code for when that sequence starts, so you can skip over all the frequently asked questions parts, the inside segment, and get right out in the bee yard and see what's going on. I do have a rule of thumb when it comes to checking in on brand new bees that are trying to make it. You want to stay out of their hive as much as possible, and when and if you do have to go in the beehive, I hope that you keep that visit short. As where I live, this has been a terrible weather season. We have rain and we have a lot of overcast days. It's a miracle they're making it at all. Their buildup is slow, but we're going to get into that. Let's see. The most recent thing, skunks in your bee yard. What do you do about them? Skunks in my bee yard. Skunks are all around. They cruise through the bee yard all the time. How do I know? I have motion activated game cameras. I'm also testing some new game cameras coming out. So if you like the secondary videos that I produce, watch for those. I'm going to give a review of that. Skunks show up on game cameras walking through my bee yard all the time. My bee yard has an electric fence around it. Skunks don't even care. They go right under it. They have such thick fur, they don't get zapped. What are they after? They're after the bees. Most of my beehives, in fact, all of them this year, are up nice and high, so the skunks can't scratch out the bees and eat them the way they used to in the past. They would scratch the landing boards, get the guard bees out at night. They would flip them off the board, rub them around on the ground, eat them, and then go after more. And obviously they're getting stung too, because I had a sequence where the skunk was making all kinds of noise. Skunks are very cat-like in their general habits. And of course, the night I tried to video, it was pouring rain and it didn't come out good at all. And that was the last time I had a skunk visit my bee yard for bees. They wander through the bee yard and they're looking for leftovers. So if there are dead bees cast out on the ground, if there are yellow jacket hornets building their nests in the ground, those are some of the worst. And I'm more than happy to have skunks come and dig them out and eat them. So skunks are tough. I have absolutely no motivation to remove skunks from my property or my bee yard because I consider them to be a huge benefit. Those of you who are setting bee hives on the ground directly are, those are accessible to skunks. So by raising your beehives up off the ground, landing boards up here, skunks have to get up on their hind feet. They're exposing their sensitive underbelly. Skunks don't like that. They would rather stay low to the ground, protected by all that heavy fur, and then they can eat the bees. So elevate your hives. I don't mind skunks at all. And that's that. Next one. Would it be worthwhile to do an inner cover that is slanted or not level so that water doesn't drip down on your bees? That's a great question for the wintertime. Here's the problem. The reason that the inner covers are flat is we're maintaining a bee space in there. So if you had an arched or a peaked inside roof and there was no inner cover, then yes, condensation would build up just on roof sheathing on houses, for example. We have soffit venting on houses, and that keeps an airflow up there, which prevents frost buildup on the interior surface of your roof sheathing. So air movement between the outer cover and the inner cover is important. Keeps things dry. But then you have an inner cover that also gets cold because it's exposed to that. And now we have warm air rising inside the colony, inside the hive, and it causes condensation inside that flat surface. Some venting there will help remove frost buildup, which later, when it gets warm enough to melt, the frost melts and then drips down on your bees. And if it's in the middle of winter, which is the worst time, those drippings will fall onto the cluster of bees, which may more than likely also be in the center of your hive. So they're in direct line, they get wet, and then they can't dry out and they can't warm up. So the problem with an inner cover that's slanted or has some kind of radius to it is that you're going to create more bee space in there. And then what the bees are going to do is they're going to build up their network of comb and propolis, and they're going to fill the space. That's why we ended up with the flat inner cover in the first place. So my solution, rather than tilting it, is a great idea. I mean, it makes sense. If it had some kind of tilt and as things started to thaw, it would trail along the edges and down the sides, the interior sides of the hive, if some water drips down there, much less detrimental to the bees than drippings directly on their bodies. So the problem is bee space, and that's why people just haven't come up with that yet. So if you have a method for maintaining that 3/8 of an inch of space, which then they just use as a corridor and they don't fill it with wax and propolis, then you're much ahead. But right now, there's no practical way to do that. When you pull it off, you would be disrupting huge chunks of comb and you would be in a mess every time you enter that hive for inspection. So it is a great question. The key to that is really venting and moving air enough so that the moist air is allowed to be pushed out by the bees and does not drip down onto the bees. And you want that double layer. Outer cover, lots of air movement, inner cover, a little more air movement, and then that intermediate cover in the bottom of it hopefully will not have frost on it that turns into water in the first place. So venting without drafts is the key. So next I have a whole ongoing sequence here with Amy. Amy has a hot hive. She inspected the hive. There's lots of varroa. They are bringing in honey. Doesn't want to ruin it. Is oxalic acid vaporization bad? Well, now here's the thing. I'm going to put a link into what are the detrimental physical aspects to people from oxalic acid in the first place, because it already exists in plants. It exists in kale. It exists in spinach. So oxalic acid is around. So often people say, and I say it too, if you're going to treat with oxalic acid vaporization, take your honey off. The other thing is we want to talk about why her bees are hot and the fact that there's a presence of varroa. When your bees are stressed and defending themselves, the chances of them not being welcoming to you as well when they're under such huge stress is also heightened. So my suggestion to Amy was she can do a couple of things about the honey super that's on, especially because they're bringing in honey right now and they're going to want to be accessing that. Your treatment cycle is very short. You're going to treat for 6 or 7 minutes, and then you can put everything back to normal once that fog has settled on the interior surfaces of your colony. So I want to know from her, once you treat with the oxalic acid vaporization and it does an initial hit on those varroa that are taking hold, does that immediately improve the attitude of those bees? And my guess is that it would. If they're already fighting, if they're already stressed, if they're already fending off something, a couple of things can happen. They can abscond. They can start swarming. Often bees will evacuate a space like that. Absconding and swarming are two different things, and absconding is when the entire colony just moves out. It's too stressful. But another response that bees often do when there are varroa or some other condition inside the hive that is a threat to the lives of the colony and the bees, they can start swarming out in rapid sequences until there's nothing but a handful of bees left. So when you have a lot of that going on and it looks like they're in profound decline, it is time to inspect and find out. And Amy is right to be trying to find a solution and to maybe consider treating. I think her original question is what to treat with. And personally, because I've gone all these years without treating colonies and I use varroa resistant hygienic bees, depending on the type of bees that you have, if they're still being overwhelmed, now you have a judgment call. If they're overwhelmed by varroa, then they're spreading varroa. So there is going to be a responsibility move here too. You have to deal with varroa if they're overwhelming your bees, because they're going to travel with your bees and they're going to go to other places. They're going to go to other colonies. So I suggested to her that oxalic acid vaporization would be a good step, and she's going to do 3 cycles, 7 days apart, which is appropriate because she has brood, and you want to have open brood at least during one of those cycles so that you're going to get all the varroa. So, but what she did, and I had an email from her again this morning, was she split the hive already, removed the honey supers, created at least 2 colonies from it. Now, in my opinion, that's kind of a problem because you have a varroa problem in the colony and we're trying to find out why the colony is behaving in a hot way. So if you do multiple things like splitting the colony, killing the queen, a number of different things all at once, you have a very difficult time narrowing down specifically what the problem was to begin with that caused them to have a change of attitude. So if we kept everything the same, if we kept the honey supers on, but just put a shim between the honey super and those bottom brood boards so that we could treat the bottom with oxalic vapor without it going up into your honey super. And that's only an issue if you plan to eat the honey from the honey super. If it's there for the bees, if this is a new colony that you're building up and you know you're not going to harvest from it, you don't have to take off the honey super. You can leave that on during your treatment. But if you are going to consume it, if there's a chance you're going to draw it off and use it for people, then shim it or remove it. And by shim, I mean a solid vapor barrier that would go between that. It could just be even a plastic trash bag. You take off that super, you put the trash bag on, set the super on, and then do your treatment. Now, if we had left everything together and none of the conditions were changed, except the fact that we introduced oxalic acid vaporization, then what's going to happen is as the varroa die back, and if that colony calmed down, and if it was no longer a hot colony, we would know for certain that it was the fact that they were fighting with varroa and losing a lot of bees. You go out early in the morning and look at your landing boards, and if you see a lot of dead bees and bees in development, if they're uncapping brood and dragging them out and throwing them out, there's a very good chance that you have a lot of varroa and that they're fighting them off. If they're losing that fight and it changes the attitude of the colony, you are going to have to treat those bees. But now we have multiple things going on. They split it. They did other things that have now introduced variables into what's going on with the colony, which further stress the colony. So now, even though she does plan to do the oxalic acid vaporization treatment, we won't know now if it's because of all the interruptions in the material condition of the colony, or if it's the varroa, or if it's a combination, or if removing the honey and everything else. So now there's so many variables that we really won't know. But my first suggestion would be, if you have a colony and you've got a high varroa count, it's time to treat. And oxalic acid vaporization is my personal recommendation for that treatment, and I hope we get updates from her. So that's going to be interesting to follow on to. But in the future, if anyone has a problem like that and they're really trying to diagnose what the behavior change is about, what caused it, only apply one remedy at a time if you really want to understand what cause and effect that was. If your queen's deficient, or if a queen is absent, sometimes a colony can get hot. If they're dealing with small hive beetles or something else, if there are a number of things that go on, but we need to address those problems one by one methodically and keep notes in your bee journal exactly what they did, what you did, what the response was, and then what the next thing that you did. So you could have a very simple problem resolution. If they respond immediately to oxalic acid vaporization, then oh, we killed the varroa, and look, the colony's back to normal. As I showed in other videos in the past, when we had a queenless hive, they were defensive and very active. And the very minute we introduced a new queen, a fertile queen, and that pheromones started to spread throughout the hive, there was an immediate change in the activity level in the hive. They were extremely calm. Landing board activity dropped right off. So we knew that that colony was responding. This behavior was altered by the fact that they were simply absent a fertile queen. So these are all interesting things, and I hope we hear more, and I hope it's a very good experience. But they've done a lot of different things at one time. You installed queens from the queen cages without leaving them for 3 days. How do you know when to do that? Okay, well, when I get new queens in and I have a queenless colony, and I know for sure that they're queenless, there are no eggs. There might be some open brood, they might be making queen cells, but there are no eggs for sure, so I know the queen is missing from a colony. When I bring in new queens through the mail, what makes me decide to open that queen cage and let them eat through the candy? You pull a cork out of this end, or you pull this cork out with the black dot there. Then you direct release the queen. 9 times out of 10, I direct release the queen because I set it right on the brood frames. I look at the nurse bees there. I watch them come up and start to feed that queen right away. If it's an infertile queen, or if they already have a queen and they're queen right, as the term goes, they'll reject this queen. They'll try to sting the workers in there. They'll go after the queen. They'll be biting at the cage. Instead of trying to feed her, they'll try to sting through the cage. You have a colony that does not want that queen. 2 reasons she might not want the queen. 1, she's not fertile. Fertile queens give off their own pheromone. So in other words, that's a queen that's been mated. She's going to lay eggs. They don't have a queen that's laying eggs. They want her right away. I open that and I let that queen go right down in there. And guess what? Every single one of those gets accepted. Now, if they're biting at it and they're acting frenzied and they're rejecting it, or they want to ball around the queen and superheat that and kill her, which is one of their methods for killing off a queen they don't want, then I'm going to get that out of there. I'm going to go use that queen somewhere else. Or there might be something wrong with the queen. Maybe she's not capable of laying eggs. So that's why I do the direct release method. I don't see any reason to interrupt a colony 3 or 4 days down the road after I install a queen cage to let the queen out, let them eat the candy, and then I go back in and now I have to retrieve this, and it's going to be completely covered in beeswax and propolis, and I have to interrupt those bees which are trying to get a start if it's a new package or something. So yeah, direct release is something that I do more often than leaving the cage in and letting them eat the candy out, and it's based on observations of honeybee behavior. Are they accepting her? Do they want her out of there? And are they feeding her right away? In my opinion, no reason to wait. Release the queen. Okay. If she dies, there's open brood. If there was open brood, there's no eggs. You know, there are a lot of things that happen, but I personally release the queen after I evaluate the colony and see what their behavior is towards her. This was interesting too. Sometimes people want to know if there is a queen in there. For example, when they're pulling and splitting hives, to me, it really doesn't matter. My practice when I'm splitting a hive is I leave the resident queen in the hive that I'm taking the split from, and I let the new colony generate their own queen because I'm going to be careful and I'm going to take out queen cells and supersedure cells and things like that, and I'm going to put those in my new hive location and I'm going to let them produce their own. How do I know for sure if the queen is going with them or staying with the colony? To me, it really doesn't matter. I don't spend a lot of time hunting out the queen because either way, one of those colonies is going to generate the queen that they don't have, and they're going to do it right away. They're going to use open brood, they're going to build queen cells, and they're going to provide new queens. They never just make one queen cell, they make several, and they're not at ground zero. Remember, we have open brood, we have capped brood, we have a replenishment of the colony constantly going on. So it's not the same as, you know, having a queenless colony with no brood. You fly in a queen, you install her. That's a total different scenario because now we're backed up more than 21 days before we're going to see new bees in that colony. So they're in jeopardy. But colonies that have open brood, they've got capped brood, which is why you're doing the split in the first place. They're super strong, they're huge, their numbers are high. But what if you absolutely want to see where the queen is? This is from, this is not my own idea here, so it's Michael Palmer. I don't know if you've ever listened to Michael Palmer speak. He's another northeastern beekeeper. He's way up in Vermont, which is where my family comes from. And he keeps bees in the worst freezing conditions. He shakes his bees onto a queen excluder, and as they migrate into the colony that they're going to go into, the queen gets trapped in the queen excluder if she's there. So as you shake your nurse bees, so you shake your bees off, you have brood that's capped. You have no bees on it because you shook them off in the parent colony. You install your brood in the new colony. You put your queen excluder on. You take now the frames that are full of nurse bees, and now you shake them onto that box. And as they migrate down into the brood frames, if there's a queen on those frames, she's going to be trapped on that queen excluder, and then you can catch her and you can put her back in that parent colony, or you can remove her altogether, whatever your plan is. It is one method of making sure that you distill the queen from the worker bees that are going to go down through that queen excluder. That is such an obvious thing to do, and I had not heard of that until I was listening to Michael Palmer, and that's a great recommendation. But me personally, if the queen stays with the parent colony, great. If she goes with the split that I'm making, also great. I don't mind, because they're just going to make a new queen. Either way, somebody's making a new queen. And they're already in progress because we have queen cells in the colony that we're removing from, and we have queen cells in the colony that we're installing from. I recently did that queenless split. Both of them generated their own queens. I have a queen in my observation hive right now running around, and I have two other queens inside their queen cells that are piping. They're announcing themselves, and we were in there last night watching them. And a queen comes out and cruises over the surface of all the frames, and then she's scooted back down in between the others. Now, she may have just recently hatched. She may not have done her virgin flight. She may not be mated and now laying eggs, because I saw no evidence of eggs being laid. But I have at least 3 queen cells in there that are unhatched. So somebody's got to kill those queens. The queen herself can go through and sting the other queens inside their queen cells. When other queens emerge, if we have a colony with multiple queens, which sometimes happens, they can actually put up with each other. If they're fertile, the workers will show a preference for one queen over another, and the workers may in fact kill the queen in the method that I described early on, which is they ball around her, superheat her, and kill her. And they would do that to a new queen that emerges before she's mated and capable of laying eggs. So there's a lot going on in the observation hive. Problem is that thing is not great for taking pictures through right now because the interior surface of the glass is giving me trouble. There's a lot of detritus on it, and I can't fill it up. But anyway, finding the queen. And should you transfer the queen? That's a personal preference. Your queen that you're getting rid of is older, so if there's a chance that they're going to swarm anyway, she's going to leave anyway. So if you take her with your split, you may resolve their propensity to swarm. Which it leads me to another comment that everybody wants to know: how do I keep my bees from swarming? How do I stop them from swarming? How do I prevent swarming? Well, let me tell you. A healthy colony that's highly productive, that wants to get their job is to reproduce. Their job is to generate a baby colony. They're going to put out a swarm. You're going to have, by the way, my clipped winged queen, who is also marked, swarmed out. I know I've always said, well, if the wings are clipped, she's going to swarm out right onto the ground and you're going to get them, and they're all going to be clustered, easy access, and you're going to rehive that swarm right away. I don't know what they did with her. She's gone. There's a new queen in there. She's huge, very fat. She's laying eggs like crazy. And my clipped winged weaver queen is gone. So I don't know what's going on. We're in the middle of swarm season. Right now, every single hive that I have, other than the new packages, they're all trying to swarm, including the splits that I did. The splits that I did, their numbers are so big. They filled their new hive so fast that, again, because we put so much brood in there, they're just swarming out. I don't know what to tell you. You cannot control a swarm. Everybody wants to stop a swarm. You can do everything you want. You can expand it. You can give them more space. You can make sure they're not honey bound. You can do everything absolutely right, and those bees are following their own biological clock, and they are going to zip out of there. But the good news is you end up with a bunch of new queens, new bees. The drones that your queens are going to mate with are going to be from the area, hopefully, that have adapted to the environment. They're cold weather hardy. And so you've got a mix of genetics, hopefully from your local zone, and those bees will do very well, and that's yet to be seen. But I've lost almost all of my original queens, including the best queen I've ever had. She's gone. She's been replaced. But they're still weaver-lined queens. And this time of year, what are the bees doing? Well, I can tell you what the bees are doing. They're getting ready for winter. That's the first thing bees in my neck of the woods do. Everything that a bee does, the pollen that they're bringing in, the brood that they're building a workforce that can go out, that can harvest more, forage more, bring in more resources, maximize their resources. The entire function of that colony, aside from reproduction, is to get themselves through winter. So they are storing up honey, they're loading everything in. We're not even into the clover nectar flow yet. When the clover starts blooming, we have a massive workforce that is going to start bringing in honey. This is it's really weird because we've had terrible weather. This is a great year for the bees. They are productive, and I don't even know why. So if you don't know why they're super healthy, why question it? Just let them go. But all they're doing all through the year, every time the sun shines, every time it's not raining, and my bees are flying in light rain. They're even bringing in, I don't know why they're bringing in pollen in light rain. In general, the consensus has always been, well, if it rains on the flowers and the pollen's damp, the bees won't touch it. Well, my bees are bringing in pollen even during light rain. So there you go. One thing for sure, when you think you know something for sure about bees, you really don't know anything for sure about bees. I know this is beginning beekeeping, and this is supposed to provide some answers for everyone, but the bottom line is do everything you can do. So to prevent swarming, let's say we could. If your bees are filling up, if that bottom box, if your brood box is filling up, make sure you put a medium super on there to give them expansion room. If you see a lot of honey and nectar stored and you're filling up the frames with that, put another box on to give them room to expand. Giving them space, ventilation, a good solid structure that they're in, well-built hives that are vented but not uncomfortable. So you don't want over-venting. Bees don't like air movement that they're not causing. So, and the other thing is stay out of those hives. If you're in your hives and inspecting just for the heck of it, you're harassing your bees. And they don't like it and they can leave. So you can cause a swarm if you want to be pesky and get into your beehives all the time and spend a lot of time looking at them and, you know, trying to learn from your frames. The bees don't like that. I know there are people that think their bees love them and they want to interact with their bees and everything else. I'm not of that mindset. I always know that I'm an intruder into that beehive, and so I want to limit my time and I want to limit the number of times. That's why I multitask. If I'm going in to feed, I'll combine that with other activities like looking for the queen. If I'm going to find eggs or something like that, I find the eggs, I see that there's a queen. I don't have to find the queen once I have evidence, and then I'm out of there. So I don't believe that my bees want me inside their nursery. Bottom entrance, how wide should it be, or should it be closed up? That falls under the ventilation of your, my philosophy has always been when you're looking at the bottom board of your beehive, if there's good egress and entry going on and you know they're getting through that opening just fine, you're probably good to go. If it's a small colony that can't defend itself very well, the rule is always to have just, you know, an 1.5 or 2 inch opening entrance so that the bees can defend it. If you have a large colony in there, but they're not piling up on the entrance, if you see that that entrance reducer has not created a traffic jam, then I see no reason to change it. You do want to have, for the summer at least, upper venting so they can cycle air through because there is nectar coming in. And what will happen when a lot of nectar comes in? You're going to see a workforce on the outside of your colony on the hive while they try to ventilate from the inside and dry it out. So you want adequate ventilation. If you only have one entrance, if you only have a bottom board entrance, then you are going to want to open that more during nectar flows. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to dehydrate the honey fast enough. And they're also going to run out of spaces to store their honey. Because what goes on when the field bees are coming in during the day, they're bringing in nectar and pollen. And the nectar has a very high water percentage. I think it's like, because I came across this when I was looking at hummingbird nectar because it's very light on sugar. So it's like 90% water and 10% fructose, 10% sugar that's provided by the plants. So we know that when the bees condense down to honey, what's the percentage, acceptable percentage of honey to water? We know that honey has to be well under 20%. So that it won't ferment, so that it won't go bad. So they're going to dehydrate that down to 15 to 18% water. So when they're bringing in all these nectar resources, they need a lot of space to put that. Otherwise, there's a term called being honey bound. When they bring in a lot of nectar and they're spreading it into all the cells, because the nectar, remember, is not dehydrated down to honey yet. So they need a lot of space to store nectar that later, about less than half that space will be occupied when it becomes honey, when it's dehydrated down to the appropriate percentage. I think state inspectors for honey won't accept honey that is at or above 19%. It's between 19 and 20% water. So because it has the risk of not surviving on the shelf. Ferments, turns bad. And the stuff that I have put refractometers on and looked at the water content, mine have always been from 15 to 17%. So what happens? All that, if you've got one box and you haven't expanded, they start putting that stuff everywhere, and eventually the queen runs out of a place to lay eggs. So what can happen? You can get honey bound, nectar bound, whatever you want to call it, and they'll leave. So then you get a swarm. How do I know that? I used to do that intentionally because I was studying swarms and I needed to video and photograph swarm activity and get audio sequences. So I used to force swarms by letting them fill all their resources, not provide room for expansion, and then knowing that I'm going to get a great big swarm out of there. But if you want to keep your bees, which most people do, the swarm, you can't guarantee you're going to catch it. So you want to expand their space, and you want twice the space that they need. And at nighttime, If you look at a colony, and you can see it if you've got I'm sure most of you don't have observation hives because that's not kind of a beginner thing to do. In my observation hive, I know that they are moving resources around. So right near the entrance, the bees can fill a bunch of cells with nectar. And during the night, the interior hive workers will be extracting from those cells and moving it up, and they start to fill the highest cells with honey resources that they're going to dehydrate down. So there's a lot of movement going on and shifting of storage going on day and night, but primarily during the day when there's the rush and all the foragers are coming in, they're just unloading the nurse bees, not just nurse bees, but all the interior workers that have not been outside yet. You'll see them sticking their tongues out. There'll be all these bees lined up, each sticking their tongues out. They're transferring their nectar from the field to the bees that reside inside the hive exclusively, and those bees put the nectar in the cells. Foraging bees do not fly in, run to a cell, and deposit that themselves. Interior worker bees do that. The only resource that comes from the outside that the bees come in and the foragers will deposit themselves will be pollen. You'll see workers come in loaded with pollen. They'll go to their dance floor, which is a specific area inside the hive. They use it the same over and over. They'll waggle dance around, brag about the pollen that they got, where they got it, and then they run off and they scratch them off and stick them in the cells, and you'll see balls of pollen in there. So, open the entrances if there's a traffic jam. Next is from Sono Sunbeam. What purpose does burr comb serve? Does burr comb and propolis, let's say, serve? Anytime you have more than bee space, for sure, what's bee space? 3/8 of an inch. So if you got a gap like this anywhere around the hive, if it gets bigger than that, the bees are going to use propolis to seal off weather, for example. And they also coat surfaces with propolis for hygienic purposes. And the comb is structural material. Comb is beeswax. So the beeswax bees will make comb all over the hive. They fill every little space. This is the most evident, again, when I go back to my observation hive, I can see that they connect every frame together. They connect the frames. Here's a surface of the frame, glass front. They run little structural connectors to that glass to keep that in its position, and they've put queen cells out there. So honeycomb, we already know the wax is structural. The other thing is it provides corridors and pathways for them to ventilate, for them to walk through. So the whole thing is a web of comb. And then, of course, they've got the comb that they store with the cells. And wherever they make comb, it has the surface appearance of the six-sided cells, even though they're not fully drawn out. So they do that cell structure everywhere, even though they never develop into full-depth cells. And the purpose of it is to modify the interior to suit the bee's purpose. So larger cells, drones, queen cells, also, for queens, and then the worker cells for workers. And beyond that, it's all structural connective tissue. The purpose of propolis is to isolate the colony members from anything that's bad for them, whether that be wind, cold weather, bacteria. A mouse gets in your hive, the bees can't drag the mouse out, they stung it to death, let's say. The bees are never going to get that mouse out of there. What's it going to do? It's going to decay and create a toxic air environment. So what do? They cover that entire mouse with propolis. So things that they can't get out of there, they seal up with propolis. Propolis is antibacterial. So it's all structure. Now this, by the way, is another reason that I became very mindful about how often I get into a beehive and how often I pull things apart. When you see how much work they spend creating venting corridors and passageways for the bees to travel through and where they're storing resources, almost always when you're pulling frames apart on your beehive, the connective tissue between the frames, you have a frame here, frame underneath, those cells that they build between there generally are drone cells. So when you pull it apart, you're going to see developing drone that are just laying on the bottom. So you're doing damage every time you open your hive, every time you start moving frames around. So it's just my opinion, if you don't have a reason to go in your beehive, that's meaningful to the bees, that really is an assessment that's going to cause you to provide some kind of action. Don't just go in there out of curiosity. If you're curious, you want to see what's going on, you want to look at your hives every single day, and I do, observation hive. In fact, I'm going to put a link to my video about the observation hive install in the video description so you can see what it's like, how I put it together, how I populated it, and what it was like. So there's that. And maybe I have a poltergeist. Anyway, so that's what it serves. Structure or isolation of materials that they don't want in the hive. Next, royal jelly. Okay. This question comes up all the time, and people have very, very firm beliefs about royal jelly. Who gets it, who doesn't? What's the bottom line? You know, back in the 1800s, 1880 something, there was a paper published about royal jelly being fed to queen bees, and that's how queen bees are made. And then somehow worker bees are fed something else, so it's called royal jelly because it's for queens. The worker bees get something else. It's also compiled from the pollen that the bees are bringing in after it's been fermented, after the bees have altered it, and then they feed that to non-queen workers or drones. That, I'm just going to settle that right now. It's, somebody's going to be mad about it. Here's the thing. Follow modern science. A lot has been done about what the diets of bees are, and a lot of observation, a lot of science, a lot of lab tests have been done. What is royal jelly? Royal jelly is created by nurse bees. They have glands that develop it. It has something to do with the pollen that they're also, pollen that's been fermented, that's been altered. These are complex proteins that are being fed to developing bees. What they have found out, it's not that workers don't get royal jelly, they do. Queens get royal jelly. What happens? One gets way more than the other. A queen develops from egg to an adult queen in 15 days. She's hatching in 16 days. So, and she's bigger and she's completely different. This is a great area of study because with the amount of royal jelly that they're feeding, they're altering the physical traits of a developing bee. That's amazing, that's astonishing, and that's why there should be more study done about it because it has to do with diet alone. Is every bee getting royal jelly? Yes. What's the difference in why does a queen bee become a queen bee? Because the queen bee gets fed more. And listen to this. When after the egg hatches and you have a larva in the cell, workers, nurse bees go right in there and they start putting royal jelly in it, and you can see it, okay? So then that's what it's going to grow and develop on. And you know what's happening? This isn't 4 feedings a day or 6 feedings a day. This is hundreds of feedings a day. So no sooner will one bee be in there feeding that than another one comes along and they're feeding it, and it will never dry out, and that little pupa starts to develop, and it develops fast. It takes 21 days for a normal worker to hatch because they're holding back on how much they're feeding it. Guess how much the queen gets fed? And this is from lab observation. So they know exactly how many visits to a queen compared to a worker will she be fed. How many feeding visits? A queen on average gets 1,400 more feeding visits with royal jelly than a worker does. Now, what if they took that on artificially? If they started doing this artificially and they controlled the feeding cycles, what happens if you feed more than a worker and less times than they feed a queen? So now we've done something weird. They did something intermediate to that. When they gave more royal jelly than a worker needs, but less royal jelly than the queen needed to develop, you know what they came up with? It's really weird. Half-developed queens. They call them princess bees. So lab science, it was the quantity, not the composition. And of course, the quality of what you're feeding your bees is going to have an immediate impact on their overall health and well-being. Could they also create undersized bees if they held back even more? So now this is people meddling with nature in order to find out what feeding royal jelly does actually to the bees. Is it an altered composition or is it an altered quantity? And the determination was that it's an altered quantity. I will try to find that study and give you a link to that also in the video description for those of you who want to read more about that. That's a very recent study, by the way. I think nobody did anything meaningful until 2016 regarding studying royal jelly, its composition, impact on developing bees. So that's amazing. And that's also why so many people have read books and resources prior to 2016 that still believe royal jelly is for queens, something else is for the worker bees. It isn't. It's been proven scientifically that it's quantity, that nothing else has changed, and that they can create little strange intermediate developing bees by altering quantities in the lab. So it's a very interesting question. I know it's going to come up again because every time I say something about it, somebody chimes in and goes, hope you know royal jelly is only for queens. Well, this isn't my research. I'm happy to pass it on. You can check it out for yourself. And so that's it. Now guess what we're doing? We're going outside. Thank you for watching the Frequently Asked Questions version. We're going to go outside. I'm going to walk you through checking up on the Saskatraz bees. Thank goodness the rain stopped just in time so we could get out there. The check that you're going to be watching happened yesterday. And if you have questions, if you want something addressed in Frequently Asked Questions episode 21 next Friday, go ahead and write it down in the comment section below. All comments are welcome. All discussions amongst yourselves are welcome. If somebody posts a question and you've got an answer for it, absolutely, interact with each other and write those down. Thanks for watching. We'll do a closeout right after we do the update on Saskatraz bees. So finally, here we are out in the bee yard where we need to be. It's nice and warm and sunny, and I'm showing you the flow hive 2. This is the one that we put the queen in. We had the little marshmallow in there. These are the neighbors, also in a flow hive 2. This one's been around for a while. Fully loaded, lots of landing board activity. We got a break in the weather. Everything is going super. These guys are bringing a lot in. They have honey, nectar. I've expanded this box recently. But we want to see about the Saskatraz bees. Here's the first one that we did the install. Now notice we've got a slatted rack on the bottom. We've got one deep, and then we've got a feeder shim on top. We're going to open this up. Now keep in mind this has only been 29 days since we put in that package. So the queen was released. She is just laying, so we're talking about new brood finally that has come from the Saskatraz line. And we're not using smoke. We're going to use 50-50 sugar water mixed with essential oils. And we're bringing equipment with us, medium box in case we need it. We've got a clean rapid round feeder that we're going to put on there. We're going to pull the old one, and we're using acorn frames if we need them, if they're full. So we're going to take a look. We're going to see what's going on and see how much they're expanding. Keep in mind, the new brood is just now starting to hatch out. So I don't expect big things, but we'll see. This is the inside of the feeder shim that I made. And of course we have to have a bucket handy because if we scrape off burr comb or propolis, we want to drop it right in a bucket, not on the ground. Here we go. Not impressive. Notice that they've built out on the acorn frames really nice. They haven't touched these lighter colored frames, which are by Man Lake. They are pre-waxed. And it looks like we basically have 2 full frames of bees. Considering this was a 3-pound package, not that great. I'm spraying the sugar water on the outlying frames, not the frames that the bees are on themselves. Let's scrape some of this burr comb off of here and drop it right in the bucket. Those bees will find their way back. And we're going to very carefully pull the frames to the side. We're going to take a look inside here and see what's going on. I want to get out of this colony fairly fast. My only goal here is to see, number one, if the queen is still here. We're going to see evidence of that if we find eggs and open brood. So there again, these are Man Lake frames we're pulling out. I'm not excited about them. I think I'm going to be sticking with the acorn frames. This was just a test to see if they showed a preference. And they certainly did. They jumped all over the acorn frames and built them up. Remember, we started this just as if you had no resources at all. Normally I would put drawn comb in here. This is honeycomb and this is honey. So there's no brood on that frame. We're going to slide that over here. And remember, I'm sliding to the sides. I'm not digging in and pulling these frames straight up and out. We risk damaging bees and comb that way. So we're going to slide it sideways here, nice and careful, and we're going to pull this up and take a look. Not huge numbers. Keep in mind they've been challenged by weather. And the other thing is, look how calm they are. We did not use smoke, remember? We just did some spritzes with the essential oils. There is brood. This is a brood frame. Along the edges there is some honey, but I'm happy to see that there are brood frame there. We're going to close this right back up. We had eggs in there and there were larvae, so the queen is doing her job, and we're going to give them more feed and help them expand here. We do not have a heavy nectar flow going on, but it's coming very soon as the clover opens. These guys I expect to build up much faster, especially now that we're finally seeing bees that are produced by the Saskatraz queen. Remember, this is the 29th day since we did the package install. So we're going to close this right up. Going to put that rapid round feeder in there. Always carry clean ones with you. We're going to put 50-50 sugar syrup in here. And they can use that to draw a comb. That's what 50-50 is pretty good for. And it's nice and warm. Today it's 80-81 degrees. And I'm wearing a vented bee suit so I can stay nice and cool. And that is by Guardian Bee Apparel. It's my favorite vented suit. I'll put that down in the video description too. Here we are with the Flow Hive 2. This is the 10 frame Flow Hive 2, which just came out this year. Nice and wide. We have a screen entry board reducer there. Let's get the straps off. Don't forget to strap down all of your hives and make sure they're not going to fall over and have an incident here. Their rapid round feeder is completely empty, so we're going to pull this off and replenish that. Again, I could just pour more sugar syrup in here, but I choose not to. I always bring clean feeders with me. And just as you would with smoke, instead of smoke, I sprayed that essential oil in the, I think we're using Pro Health or Honeybee Healthy. They're interchangeable in my opinion. That's the old one. We'll pull it off. We're going to release those bees later. And here we go. Much better. Now look, this is the man-like frames again, and look how different these bees are. Definitely building them out. And I intermittently put wooden frames in there so we could use the plastic frames as a guide, and then hoping that the bees would draw down the comb straight from the wooden frames without running them sideways on us. It is critical to make sure that your hive is perfectly level, and this one is side to side. We're going to pull these plastic frames out of here. I will say though with confidence that I do recommend the Acorn heavy wax frames over these man-like frames. They're just a little rough for my liking, and here the bees have run what often happens with some plastic frames. They're running their comb parallel to it. They attach it to the top bar there, and they don't really marry it well to the surface. And then the next frame is a wooden frame, foundationless. There is no wire in this. They are only attached to that top edge, and be very careful if you pull out a frame like this. If you notice it's attached along the top, I ran a little crayon of wax across that piece there when we were doing the install. Again, I'm doing this as you would if you were a beginner with no comb to start with. And when you pull those frames out, don't tip them flat. Keep them vertical. That's when the comb is strongest. Now this colony is doing much better. This is the colony that the queen had the little marshmallow plug in there. So we put the marshmallow plug in just for kicks. Basically a direct release of both of these queens. This one is doing much better than the other one. And their comb building is great. Keep in mind though, we're in transition here. The package of bees is getting to the end, and the new workers that are coming out are actually from the queen. But I would say this queen is outperforming the other one. Here we are. Remember, fragile stuff. Don't tip it. Keep it vertical. Look at both sides. There is some brood in here, so I'm impressed. And there's also some honey around the edges. Now that's natural comb. It doesn't come any more natural than that. They are attaching it only at the top, and if you want to make cut comb later, that would be the method, but that's a brood frame. So we'll just put that along the edge here, and we're going to pull the next frame over, see what's going on. They do have plenty of honey in here. We're going to keep feed on these bees. We're not going to be pulling any honey off of this colony, so load them right up and make sure those rainy days don't cause a drawback there. Now that's capped brood. We do have open brood. We've got eggs and larvae, so we know the queen is doing good. The queens are marked. They have green dots on them. I don't feel like I have to track down the queen specifically. And again, look how calm the bees are. No smoke, sugar water, essential oils. That's it. And they're pretty calm. This is, of course, afternoon, mid-afternoon, and we've got some capped brood here. If you do this midday, early afternoon, most of your foraging bees are out and about. Look at all this brood comb. They're doing fantastic. That cinnamon colored cappings there, this is honey on this side. And they've got some comb mixed in there in the center. So the darker tan is the capped brood, and the light colored cappings are, of course, honey. And it looks like a pretty sporadic pattern here, but I am happy with the population of this colony. I think I will put a medium super on this one and expand them because they are filling up their frames. And the other one we left as a single deep because frankly they just weren't very productive. This one we're going to expand, and it's exciting for me because this, of course, is on the new larger Flow Hive 2, and I'd like to see if they can't actually get to the point where they would fill a Flow Hive this year. So we'll have a deep and we'll have a medium super on this one. We'll watch them expand. And of course we're going to keep feed on them until the clover starts to bloom, and that will be a strong nectar flow. And then we'll just let the feed run out and we won't replenish it. And if the population builds really well, we'll open an upper entrance on these guys. So I'm happy with this one. And look at the difference though. The manlate frames are in this and the other one they didn't care about them. This one they use them well. So you just never can tell. And of course, in this medium super, notice I'm using all heavy wax acorn frames. We're going to see how that goes. Get these little gals out of the way here. We're going to put that clean rabbit round feeder in. I'm going to fill that right up, and since this is the last hive I'm going to look at, we're going to pour sugar syrup in here, and I'm even going to empty my spray bottle into this rapid round feeder. And you want to make sure that clear centerpiece is well centered and sit on the bottom shims that support it, because you don't want your bees getting out when it gets to the bottom. We have not had that problem, but other people told me they did have that problem. So make sure it's well centered and on the lowest bracket there. And we're going to cover this up and button it right up here. That's it. Get the flow hive on it. We're going to put the straps back on there and secure it. I hope you enjoyed this. In my opinion, the Saskatraz bees are doing great. Their disposition is very calm, and we have a wide variance in their productivity. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.